I would echo it as well. No excuses. We're going to get to the bottom of this. We first and foremost from the Defense Department want to pass our condolences to the 64 souls and their families that were affected by this. Never should happen. And certainly the 3 service members, the 3 soldiers, a young captain, staff sergeant, and a CW2, Chief Warrant Officer, on a routine annual retraining of night flights on a standard corridor for a continuity of government mission. The military does dangerous things. It does routine things on the regular basis. Tragically, last night, a mistake was made. I think the president is right. There was some sort of an elevation issue that we have immediately begun investigating at the DOD and Army level. Army CID is on the ground investigating. Top-tier aviation assets inside the DOD are investigating, sir, to get to the bottom of it so that it does not happen again, because it's absolutely unacceptable. But I want to echo what the Transportation Secretary and you, Mr. President, said, because it pertains to the DOD as well. We will have the best and brightest in every position possible. As you said in your inaugural, it is colorblind and merit-based. The best leaders possible, whether it's flying Black Hawks and flying airplanes, leading platoons, or in government. The era of DEI is gone at the Defense Department, and we need the best and brightest, whether it's in our air traffic control, or whether it's in our generals, or whether it's throughout government. So thank you for your leadership and courage on that, sir, and we'll stand by you on it. Thank you very much.
JD, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, for your leadership. I just want to reemphasize something the President said, and you've heard from the Secretary of Transportation and of Defense. There really was a whole of government response. We were all on the phone. We were all communicating yesterday, trying to get to the bottom of this immediately, but also try to communicate with the American people about what happened. Something the President said that I think bears reemphasizing, which is that when you don't have the best standards in who you're hiring, it means, on the one hand, you're not getting the best people in government, but on the other hand, it puts stresses on the people who are already there. And I think that is a core part of what President Trump is going to bring and has already brought to Washington, D.C., is we want to hire the best people because we want the best people at air traffic control, and we want to make sure we have enough people at air traffic control who are actually competent to do the job. If you go back to just some of the headlines over the past 10 years, you have many hundreds of people suing the government because they would like to be air traffic controllers, but they were turned away because of the color of their skin. That policy ends under Donald Trump's leadership because safety is the first priority of our aviation industry. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, on DEI and the claims that you've made, are you saying this crash was somehow caused and the result of diversity hiring? And what evidence have you seen to support these claims?
It just could have been. We have a high standard. We've had a much higher standard than anybody else. And there are things where you have to go by brain power. You have to go by psychological quality. And psychological quality is a very important element of it. These are various very powerful tests that we put to use, and they were terminated by Biden. And Biden went by a standard that's the exact opposite. So we don't know, but we do know that you had 2 planes at the same level. You had a helicopter and a plane. That shouldn't have happened. And we'll see. We're going to look into that. We're going to see. But certainly for an air traffic controller, we want the brightest, the smartest, the sharpest. We want somebody that's psychologically superior, and that's what we're going to have. Yeah. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Mr. President, you mentioned at the top of the briefing that there were several Russian nationals on the flight.
Yes.
Will the U.S. government be willing to facilitate the transfer of their remains, considering the fact there is no direct air travel between the 2 countries?
We've already been in contact with Russia, and the answer is yes, we will facilitate. Yes. Please, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. The situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is getting worse, even though President John Lorenzo has been mediating the conflict between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo because he wants to bring peace and stability. the situation is really bad right now. I want to hear from Ms. President if you have any plan in the future to bring peace in the
Well, you're
Democratic
asking me a
Republic
question
of the
about
Congo.
Rwanda, and it is a very serious problem. I agree, but I don't think it's appropriate right now to talk about it. But it is a very serious problem.
We don't even yet know the names of the 67 people who were killed, and you are blaming Democrats and DEI policies and air traffic control and seemingly the member of the U.S. military who was flying that Black Hawk helicopter. Don't you think you're getting ahead of the investigation right now?
No, I don't think so at all. I don't think with the names of the people. You mean the names of the people that are on the plane? You think that's going to make a difference?
Does it comfort their families
They
to
are
hear you
a
blaming
group of
DEI
people that have
policies?
lost their lives. If you want a list of the names, we can give you that. We'll be giving that very soon. We're in coordination with American Airlines. We're in coordination very strongly, obviously, with the military. But I think that's not a very smart question.
But are you
I'm
blaming-
surprised coming from you.
Are you blaming air
Please.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you, President Trump. Thank you for being here. Based on your analysis so far, do you have a sense of who was at fault, if it was the plane, the helicopter, air traffic control, and can you assure people that it is safe to fly in and out of D.C.?
Well, I've given you the analysis, and the analysis was it was based on vision. You had a lot of people that saw what was happening. You had some people that knew what was happening. There was some warnings, but the warnings were given very, very late. You know, those warnings were given very late. It was almost as they were given. A few seconds later, there was a crash. It should have been brought up earlier. But the people in the helicopter should have seen where they were going. I can't imagine people with 20/20 vision not seeing, you know, what's happening up there. Again, they shouldn't have been at the same height. You're going in reverse directions or sideways directions. Obviously, you want to be at different heights. I see it all the time when I'm flying. You have planes going in the opposite. They're always lower. We're higher. So if somehow there's a screw up, there's not going to be a tragedy. It'll be close, but you know, there's never going to be a tragedy if you're at a different elevation. For whatever reason, they were at the same elevation. And also, from the American Airlines standard, he's along the track that every plane is along. You say, what was a helicopter doing in that track? It's very sad. But visually, somebody should have been able to see and taken that helicopter out of play. And they should have been at a different height.
Thank you, sir. You mentioned the Russians that were on board that plane. What other nationalities were on board that passenger
There
jet?
were a couple of others. We're going to be announcing it in about an hour. We have some very specific information. We're calling the countries. We've spoken to most of them, but there were some other countries represented.
Mr. President, have you spoken to President Putin?
I have not, no.
Mr. President, on your executive order,
Not about this.
on your executive order, you've already issued an executive order you say will restore aviation safety.
Right.
This crash happened after that. Was the executive order successful, and what more needs to change to keep people safe?
Well, you know, we issued it 3 days ago, and we're in the process of making those changes. This is something that should have been done a long time ago. Actually, my original order should have never been changed, and I think maybe you wouldn't have had this problem. Maybe. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. We see like everyday life that very often those diversity hires cause sometimes issues, as you just mentioned. So what plan do you have? Are we going to see some fire? Are you going to fire some of those diversity hire in the federal government? What's plan do you have?
I would say the answer is yes. If we find that people aren't mentally competent, you see the language. The language is put out by them. And if you see that, I'm not going to bore you by reading it again, but these are not people that should be doing this particular job. They'd be very good for certain jobs, but not people that should be doing this particular job.
Mr. President, you have today blamed the diversity elements, but then told us that you weren't sure that the controllers made any mistake. You then said perhaps the helicopter pilots were the ones who made the mistake.
It's all under investigation.
I understand that. That's why I'm trying to figure out how you can come to the conclusion right now that diversity had something to do with this crash.
Because I have common sense, okay? And unfortunately, a lot of people don't. We want brilliant people doing this. This is a major chess game at the highest level. When you have 60 planes coming in during a short period of time, and they're all coming in different directions. And you're dealing with very high-level computer work and very complex computers. And one of the other things I will tell you is that the systems that were built, I was going to rebuild the entire system, and then we had an election that didn't turn out the way it should have. But they didn't build the systems properly. They spent a lot of money renovating a system, spending much more money than they would have spent if they bought a new system for air traffic controllers, meaning the computerized systems. There are certain companies that do a very good job. They didn't use those companies. They used companies that should not have been doing it. No, I think it's very important to understand that for some jobs, and not only this, but air traffic controllers, they have to be at the highest level of genius. Okay.
I want to ask you about the ice skaters in a moment because the U.S. Ice Skating Committee was affected. But first, if I can, the cited FAA text that you read is real. But the implication that this policy is new or that it stems from efforts that began under President Biden or the Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg is demonstrably false. It's been on the FAA's website.
That, you?
No, it's on the website, the FAA's website. It was there in 2013. It was there for the entirety.
What I read.
It was there for the entirety of your administration too. So my question is, why didn't you change the policy during your first administration?
I did change it. I changed the Obama policy, and we had a very good policy. And then Biden came in, and he changed it. And then when I came in 2 days, 3 days ago, I signed a new order, bringing it to the highest level of intelligence. Okay.
It was on the website.
Please. Quiet.
Welcome back to the. I'm sorry. You mentioned that a vision was probably the problem that was at issue in this crash. There's been some reports that one of the pilots in the helicopter may have been using night vision equipment. Was there any indication?
I heard that. We don't know. We're going to know that pretty soon. It may change your view plane if you do have the night vision. So it's very possible that could have happened. That would be maybe a reason why you wouldn't actually see as well as on a clear night. You can see sometimes better without it. I have a couple of more.
Mr. President, is it helpful to have your Secretary of Transportation confirmed, and does this intensify your interest in getting other nominees confirmed quickly?
Go to what?
Is it helpful to have your Secretary of Transportation confirmed, and does this intensify your interest in getting other nominees confirmed quickly as well?
Well, sure. We want fast confirmations. And the Democrats, as you know, are doing everything they can to delay them. They've taken too long. We're struggling to get very good people that everybody knows are going to be confirmed, but we're struggling to get them out faster. We want them out faster. It's a good question, actually. We've been pushing Sean. Everyone knows Sean for a long time. He got many, many Democrat votes, but they want to take as long as they can. They ask questions like some of the questions that Peter would ask that were totally irrelevant and not very good questions, but they want to just keep it going. They want to keep it going as long as possible. I was very honored, actually, that you got so many Democrat votes. That was really good. That was really good.
When I try to meet with the families, and second question, is it your impression that military training was done during that time?
The what?
The training that the helicopter was involved in. Is it anything you can tell us about that?
You don't know. These are the things that will come up with the investigation. You don't know, but the helicopter obviously was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and a tragedy occurred. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President.
I've got a question about the...
No, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. You've been critical of the current regulations, and you've called for big reforms at FAA. I'm curious, sir,
I made the reforms, actually.
What is your message?
3 days ago, I made them.
Yes, sir. What is your message then to the American public in the weeks and months ahead? Should they feel hesitant to fly? And if you could clarify perhaps something that the Defense Secretary said when he said that this helicopter went on a continuity of government mission?
I don't know what that refers to, but they were practicing. They do that. They call it practicing, and they were, and that's something that should be done. It's only continuity in the sense that we want to have very good people, and that has to be in continuity, and that's what they refer to. But it was basically practice, and it was a practice that worked out very, very badly. Okay.
On his question, the first question, Should people be hesitant to fly right now?
No, not at all. I've not hesitated to fly. This is something that it's been many years that something like this has happened. And the collision is just something that we don't expect ever to happen again. We are going to have the highest level people. We've already hired some of the people that you've already hired for that position long before we knew about this. I mean, long before. From the time I came in, we started going out and getting the best people because I said it's not appropriate what they're doing. I think it's a tremendous mistake. You know, they like to do things and they like to take them too far, and this is sometimes what ends up happening. Now, with that, I'm not blaming the controller. I'm saying there are things that you could question, like the height of the helicopter, the height of the plane being at the same level and going in opposite directions. It's not a positive. But no, we're already hiring people. No, flying is very safe. We have the safest flying anywhere in the world, and we'll keep it that way. Thank you all very much. Thank you very much, everybody.
Okay, yeah, hold on. An hour of anguish for our nation. No survivor.
In the days to come, we'll be working very, very diligently in the days to come. We're here for you to wipe away the tears and to offer you our devotion, our love, and our support. There's great support. In moments like this, the differences between Americans fade to nothing compared to the bonds of affection and loyalty that unite us all, both as Americans and even as nations. We are one family, and today we are all heartbroken. We're all searching for answers. That icy Potomac, was it cold, cold night, cold water. We're all overcome with the grief for many who have so tragically perished, will no longer be with us. Together we take solace in the knowledge that their journey ended not in the cold waters of the Potomac, but in the warm embrace of a loving God. We do not know what led to this crash, but we have some very strong opinions and ideas, and I think we'll probably state those opinions now. Because over the years I've watched as things like this happen, and they say, well, we're always investigating, and then the investigation 3 years later, they announce it. We think we have some pretty good ideas, but we'll find out how this disaster occurred, and we'll ensure that nothing like this ever happens again. The FAA and the NTSB and the U.S. military will be carrying out a systematic and comprehensive investigation. Our new Secretary of Transportation, Sean Duffy, his second day on the job when that happened. It's a rough one. We'll be working tirelessly. He's a great gentleman. The whole group these are great people, and they are working tirelessly to figure out exactly what happened. We will state certain opinions, however. I'm also immediately appointing an acting commissioner to the FAA, Christopher Rocheleau, a 22-year veteran of the agency, highly respected. Christopher, thank you very much. Appreciate it. We must have only the highest standards for those who work in our aviation system. I changed the Obama standards from very mediocre at best to extraordinary. You remember that. Only the highest aptitude, they have to be the highest intellect and psychologically superior people were allowed to qualify for air traffic controllers. That was not so prior to getting there. When I arrived in 2016, I made that change very early on because I always felt this was a job that, and other jobs too, but this was a job that had to be superior intelligence, and we didn't really have that, and we had it. And then when I left office and Biden took over, he changed them back to lower than ever before. I put safe, very interesting. About a week ago, almost upon entering office, I signed something last week that was an executive order, very powerful, on restoring the highest standards of air traffic controllers. And others, by the way.
And breaking overnight, CNN has exclusively obtained 2 new videos offering a more direct angle and vantage point of the midair tragedy between the American Eagle's flight and the Black Hawk helicopter. A warning, these videos are difficult to see as we are also learning more about these 67 lives that were lost in this collision. This morning, the New York Times is reporting that the helicopter may have been flying outside of its approved flight path and higher than it should have been. We'll get much more to that. Let's get to the videos. The first video we want to show you, the bright light that you see at the top is the American Airlines jet as it approached the runway. Then you see the helicopter flying directly into the frame and directly into the plane. Both aircraft immediately then crashing down into the Potomac River. The second video, it appears to be surveillance video from the airport and showing the very same helicopter moving along the river as the plane approaches the runway at DCA, and then the collision and the explosion and into the Potomac River. Horrifying. Both now to the investigation into what led to that horrific crash. Both of the so-called black boxes have been recovered from the commercial jet, are being examined and analyzed. Those black boxes are going to be key to pinpointing what exactly happened in the moments before the deadly crash. CNN's Renee Marsh is following all of this live from Reagan National Airport. Renee, what is the latest that you're picking up?
Well, let's focus on the victims first. Kate, we can tell you that as of this morning, 14 bodies are still missing, 4 of them still pinned inside of the aircraft, and 2 of the soldiers who were inside of that Black Hawk helicopter have yet to be recovered. We know that recovery efforts will resume soon as sun comes up this morning. Now, we also are expecting the flight manifest with the names of the victims, all of them who were on board the commercial aircraft, to potentially be released today. And we also know that President Donald Trump has plans to meet with some of the victims' families. It is unclear when that meeting will happen. Now, as for the investigation, that is ramping up this morning. You mentioned the black boxes have been recovered from both aircraft, both the airplane as well as the Black Hawk helicopter. The NTSB telling us yesterday that they expect to have a preliminary report with a readout from these black boxes within the next 30 days. Investigators are also waiting for a crane to arrive on this crash site. That crane will be helpful in trying to remove much of this debris. That will be critical in this investigation, as well as the debris will hold clues for investigators. And Kate, this morning we're also learning about staffing in that air traffic control tower. We heard that air traffic control audio in which they warned the pilot of the Black Hawk helicopter about the commercial regional jet. And now CNN has learned that one air traffic controller was actually working 2 different tower positions, directing traffic for both local traffic as well as helicopter traffic. However, this source tells us that that is not out of the norm. Kate?
And Ray, there's also new reporting today about some other recent close calls at DCA. What are you picking up on that?
Right. So what we have learned is just about a day before Wednesday night's deadly incident that there was another flight approaching Reagan National Airport, and it was forced to abort its first landing after a helicopter came close to its path. So concerning information that there was another situation where a helicopter, yet again, coming close into its path. And I've spoken to several people within the aviation industry yesterday, and they brought up this idea that it is time to ask the question as to whether these military aircraft should be flying in the same airspace along the same path as these commercial aircraft. Of course, as the NTSB wraps up its investigation, which will be many, many months from now, they will make recommendations that will essentially change aviation safety for years to come, to essentially make sure that this sort of thing does not happen again. But certainly people paying a lot of attention as to whether these military aircraft should be flying in the same airspace as these commercial aircraft around this airport. Kate?
Renee, thank you very much. John?
And as Kate was mentioning, there is also new information this morning on the Army Black Hawk SB has provided new information on the two major aircraft crashes that happened earlier this week. NTSB officials say the flight recorders they've recovered in the plane crash near Ronald Reagan National Airport were working and are providing plenty of new data. It's where an American Airlines passenger jet collided with an Army Black Hawk helicopter in midair over the Potomac River. 67 people were killed, 3 in the helicopter and 64 on the plane. So far, 42 bodies have been recovered, and officials say the jet's flight recorder captured the final seconds of that flight.
At 8:47:39, a radio transmission from the tower was audible asking Pat 25 if the CRJ was in sight. 1 second later, the crew received an automated traffic advice.
We begin tonight with the Army releasing the name of the 3rd soldier who died in a mid-air collision between an Army helicopter and passenger plane Wednesday evening that killed 67 people. Captain Rebecca Lobach is from North Carolina. The Army released Lobach's name in just the last several hours. And here's what we know about her. She's from Durham and served as an aviation officer since July 2019. She has an Army Commendation Medal and an Achievement Medal and graduated from ROTC at UNC Chapel Hill. Lobach was in the 20% of cadets nationwide and had more than 450 hours of flight time. Her family released a statement saying, quote, "We are devastated by the loss of our beloved Rebecca. She was a bright star in all of our lives. She was kind, generous, brilliant, funny, ambitious, and strong. No one dreamed bigger or worked harder to achieve her goals." The Army has released all 3 names of the crew. Here they are again, the latest Durham native Captain Rebecca Lobach. The others are Staff Sergeant Ryan Austin O'Hara and Chief Warrant Officer Andrew Lloyd Eves.
There can't be a more terrible moment for anyone as a parent.
No. We met Gary O'Hara grieving in his Georgia home. His son was 28-year-old Staff Sergeant Ryan O'Hara. He survived a tour in Afghanistan only to be killed in the skies over Washington, D.C.
What do you want people to remember about this moment and your son's sacrifice?
He loved being in the military. He was so proud of being in the Army.
When news of the mid-air collision first broke Wednesday night, all Gary O'Hara heard was Black Hawk down.
I know what the routine is, so it could have been anybody in his group. I just knew that it was him. My heart just broke.
And how did they tell you?
I didn't get confirmation until 2 Army soldiers knocked on my door yesterday morning.
And said?
To deliver a letter to say that, your son appears to have been killed in a tragic accident. Seeing 2 Army officers at my front door, it's heartbreaking.
Ryan O'Hara's body has been recovered from the Potomac River.
It's very touching to see the other soldiers saluting as they take him out with the draped flag over it, but to sit there and think that that's my little boy, it's crushing.
President Trump has faulted both the Black Hawk pilots and, without evidence, unspecified DEI initiatives in the airport's control tower.
Does that make this moment harder?
Yeah. It definitely does. I think for any parent, I know Ryan respected the people that he flew with and trusted them with his life. You have to earn your spot to be put into that helicopter. They don't just give it to you. You earn it.
What will you tell your grandson about his father?
He was a wonderful person, made me a better person for having to raise him. I couldn't have asked for a better son.
Ryan O'Hara had hoped to be reassigned here at Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia, to bring his young family closer to home. Instead, his family is planning a funeral. For CBS Saturday Morning, I'm Mark Strassman in Savannah, Georgia.
Tonight, we're learning the identity of one of the helicopter co-pilots in that crash. This is Captain Rebecca Lobach. Army officials say she
So I want to bring in Elizabeth McCormick, a former Black Hawk helicopter pilot, and Cedric Layton, CNN military analyst and retired Air Force colonel. Elizabeth, let me start with you. An Army pilot who has flown Black Hawk helicopters, like you, in this area around Reagan National Airport, told CNN's reporter Haley Pritzky, that the Army's flights are routinely planned down to the tiniest detail. This pilot said that based on the risk, the briefer will approve or disapprove parts of the flight plan. That assessment is then run by the unit's commander, then submitted to the FAA. So if it went through all of those levels, the question, of course, is just how could this have happened?
Well, I believe there's three things that happened. If it had just been one, it wouldn't have been an issue, but three different things happened. First of all, they only had a crew of 3. And if you're flying a visual flight plan in a crowded airspace like this, they really should have had 2 crew chiefs in the back of the helicopter to clear each side, as the pilots only have visibility from straight ahead 12 to 3 o'clock, or 12 from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock. So you only have visibility of the front 180 degrees. Your crew chiefs clear the back. If you only have 1 crew chief, how much can you clear? So I think that was a major issue.
So
as
that's
well
interesting.
As the, yeah, go ahead.
Keep going. Well, so are you saying instead of a crew of 3, it should have been a crew of 4? How many people should have been on the helicopter? And then please continue with your other 2 points.
Yes, so 3 is a minimum crew for a Black Hawk helicopter. In my opinion, when you're going into visual flight mode in a crowded airspace like this, it should be a minimum of 4. So you have a pilot on each side for visibility. That's the first one. The second one is, it is, whether they were on night vision goggles at that time or not, it is a very cluttered airspace with a lot of lighting and the lights reflecting on the river. And so with that, it's easy to kind of get a little disoriented as far as the height. They were supposed to be at 200 feet, which is the helicopter routing in that area, and it wouldn't have been a conflict, but they were not at 200 feet. Obviously, reportedly, the incident happened at around 350 to 400 feet as the airliner was descending. So that they were at the wrong height. So that's a pilot error. The first would be a policy error or choice. And then the third is air traffic control said, do you have the CRJ in sight? Well, there were two aircraft in their field of view, and actually only one was really obvious to them. And that was if you watch the video, the aircraft taking off in the foreground is probably the one they were facing, the pilots were facing, and said, yeah, I got it. The air traffic control should have said, do you have the aircraft at 5 o'clock? So they were looking at the rear. If they had done that, the Black Hawk is maneuverable. The Black Hawk could have moved out of the way quickly. They can move on a dime and make that happen. And it wouldn't have happened.
Cedric, that's one of the most informed explanations I've heard of what possibly went wrong that I've yet. Thank you so much for that. Do you agree with what you had to say?
Yeah, basically I do, Jake. Elizabeth has obviously a wealth of experience with this, and when you look at the way in which the crews are set up for Black Hawk helicopters, that's a critical thing. You know, you've got the mission planning piece that you mentioned, and as Elizabeth was explaining, there are also so many concerns that they have to really look at, including not only the weather and not only air traffic considerations, but also what kind of things they can expect in terms of topographical features and things like that. And that should be a given. But there are things that change sometimes. Sometimes there's new construction and things like that. And so they have to have as much meticulous planning as possible. And if that planning isn't taken into consideration and isn't done in the right way, then of course there could be significant consequences. Not saying that that happened here, of course.
Right. We don't know. We're just trying to make informed observations about what possibly happened. Obviously, Elizabeth says that the Black Hawk was supposed to be at 200 feet, and it was actually at 350. Right. Is that easy? Is that a mistake that's easy to make to be at 350 when you think you're at 200 feet?
Not normally, because the altimeter, which measures your altitude, is supposed to be calibrated to be exact, and you should never fly an aircraft that doesn't have that kind of an instrument calibrated properly. So that should not happen. If they, for some reason flew at 300 instead of 200, that could be a significant issue, and that could explain why they were flying, where they were flying, and at what altitude they were flying. So it is a significant thing that the NTSB is definitely going to have to look at.
All right, fascinating stuff. Cedric Clayton here and Elizabeth McCormick. Thanks to both of you.
For more on this, I want to bring in CNN's Danny Freeman, who is here with me at Reagan National Airport. And Danny, obviously, anyone who lives in this area has flown inside this airport a million times and understands how busy these runways are. This was actually a huge fight in Congress last year because lawmakers want to always add a direct flight so they can get back home easily on the weekends when they're out of session. But lawmakers from Virginia and from Maryland were expressing a lot of concern about adding more flights to put in this airspace, given how congested it already was.
Yeah, you heard Senator Tim Kaine speak about that a lot, both last night and, of course, today as well, that this has been a concern that he's been talking about for quite some time. And I think you can expect to hear more about that, not only because of the tragedy that happened yesterday, but also because part of our CNN Investigates team, they've been unveiling, or I should say reporting on, near misses, specifically here at Reagan National Airport in the past, that have also specifically happened when it comes to landing around helicopters. According to, again, some of our CNN Investigates team.
Pass 25, this is Georgia in flight. Pass 25, pass 1, this is Georgia.
At 8:47 p.m., an Army Black Hawk helicopter collided with a regional jet in the nation's capital. The crash occurred over the Potomac River near Reagan National Airport, killing 67 people. It's one of the most restricted airspaces in the country. But this particular area has long worried pilots like retired Army officer Daryl Feller.
That's probably the most dangerous spot on all those routes in D.C.
So here's everything we know about why that area is so precarious. The 33-mile radius around Washington, D.C. is considered a special flight rules area. Pilots have to have advanced clearance from the FAA to fly here, and aircraft must have altitude encoding transponders, among other things. Within that, there's a 17-mile flight-restricted zone around Reagan Airport, with even stricter rules. And then there are prohibited areas around the White House, National Mall, and the Vice President's residence. But even with the restrictions, it's still one of the most congested airspaces in the country, with civilian, military, police, and other government aircraft constantly operating. To help manage this, D.C. has designated helicopter corridors, as well as altitude restrictions to keep everyone safe. So what happened during the crash? Flight data shows the Black Hawk helicopter flying south down a helicopter corridor over the Potomac River. Military officials say the pilots were experienced and were conducting an annual night training mission known as a check ride. Meanwhile, American Airlines Flight 5342 was traveling north toward Reagan National. It was originally supposed to land on runway 1, with a flight path that goes up the river. But at approximately 8:42 p.m., minutes before landing, the jet was told to use a different, shorter runway.
Check runway 33.
Yeah, we can do 33 for Blue 6342.
Change the turn for runway 33, clear to land.
Runway changes aren't unusual, but it meant the plane had to bow right before turning sharply left and cutting across the helicopter corridor. A move that pilots say makes the jet hard for helicopters to see, especially at a low altitude.
Confusion with ground lights is what it's called. When you're flying south and you get just to the east of the airport, off to the left is southeast D.C. And so there's a lot of city lights, street lights. I-295 is over there, so there's a lot of vehicle lights. What happens is low-flying aircraft will get lost in the background of all those city lights, and you can't see them if they're moving towards you, away from you, or you can't see them at all.
There are also questions about staffing of air traffic control that night and whether more people should have been working. Another potential problem was altitude. Helicopters are supposed to fly below 200 feet in this part of the corridor, but flight data shows the helicopter may have risen above 300 feet as the airplane was descending from 400 feet. Officials say data from the aircraft's recording device still needs to be investigated to confirm. But Feller says even if altitude was a factor, something else likely went wrong before that.
A professional Army aviator is not going to fly within 100 feet of a passenger jet. He's just not going to do that. I would suspect that he didn't see the jet.
During a press briefing, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said this.
There was some sort of an elevation issue that we have immediately begun investigating at the DoD and Army level. Army CID is on the ground investigating. Top-tier aviation assets inside the DoD are investigating, sir, to get to the bottom of it.
Let's start with the moment of impact.
It's nighttime, January 29th, just before 9 p.m. local over Washington, D.C. Ignore this plane taking off. It's not directly involved. It's these two dots you want to keep your eye on. This is a Sikorsky H-60, a Black Hawk military helicopter. This is American Eagle Flight 5342. That's an American Airlines plane on approach for a landing at Reagan Washington National Airport. They're about to crash into each other. What that would have sounded like from a comms perspective, we can begin to understand, courtesy of a site called Live ATC. They monitor air traffic communication for more than 1,000 airports worldwide.
Pass 25, CRJ in flight. Pass 25, pass line is CRJ.
Pat 25, that's the helicopter. CRJ, that's the passenger plane with 64 people on board. What you're hearing there is air traffic control asking the helicopter pilot if they see the plane, because 21 seconds later, we now know they would collide in midair.
American 472, Washington, 1 star, 32017. Did you see that?
And what everybody nearby would have seen was this: two lights converging and a fireball, a devastating, deadly impact. What witnesses described as a stream of sparks.
We were just talking. Next thing you know, I heard a loud explosion. I looked to the left, saw just a big ball of fire, and then wreckage just falling down towards the river. And my neighbor hollered out, "Oh my God, that's a plane."
But then silence. From that point on, if you saw a stream of lights, they were probably the flashing lights of first responders, because there was no fiery ground explosion. Both the plane and the helicopter crashed into the Potomac River. We can see that on flight radar trackers like this one from FlightAware. The particular route of this passenger plane happens just about every day, a 2.5-hour flight from Wichita, Kansas to Reagan National in DC. You can see from this flight on January 27th what an approach from the north might look like. This plane entered a holding pattern before touching down. The day before, a relatively smooth approach from the south. But you can see the difference with the flight that just crashed. It swings a little wider, heading for a different runway. But we lose the signal right at the river, well short of the airport itself. The most immediate question for first responders would have been, could anyone possibly have survived?
Very quickly, this call escalated. Responders realized that they had a plane crash and immediately escalated to a response that ultimately included about 300 people.
But there were two big problems. It was dark and it was cold. Divers had to contend with chunks of ice among the debris. The fuselage of the plane split into 3 parts. The helicopter reportedly upside down.
The challenges are access. The water that we're operating in is about 8 feet deep. There is wind, there is pieces of ice out there, so it's just dangerous and hard to work in.
And for a passenger suddenly plunged into ice-cold water, physiologically a few things happen. You start to gasp for air, hyperventilate, cold shock affects your thinking, your decision-making. Your heart rate shoots up, and within minutes, you lose muscle control. Then, hypothermia sets in. The night of the crash, this was a search and rescue mission. The following morning, it was a recovery operation.
At this point, we don't believe there are any survivors from this accident. And we have recovered 27 people from the plane and 1 from the helicopter.
According to the Pentagon, there were 3 soldiers in the Black Hawk helicopter. On the plane, according to American Airlines, 64 people. 60 of them passengers, 2 flight attendants, and 2 pilots.
We will continue to work to find all the bodies and collect them and reunite them with their loved ones.
U.S. Figure Skating, that's the American governing body for the sport. They've also confirmed several of their members were on board. Athletes, coaches, returning from a development camp and a national championship in Wichita this week.
Still waiting on a lot of identifications. We do know that a large amount, at least 14 of the 64 people who died on the plane in this crash were from the U.S. figure skating community.
But there's an important question investigators will try to answer over the coming months, maybe even years. How could something like this have happened?
And at this time, we don't know why the military aircraft came into the path of the PSA aircraft.
We can hear from air traffic control recordings. Flight 5342, the passenger plane, was cleared to land, but so too was the helicopter cleared to fly.
The helicopter was in a standard pattern. If you live in the DC area, you'll see helicopters up and down the river.
This is true. Reagan National is one of the more complex airports to navigate in the U.S. because of its proximity to military infrastructure, the U.S. Capitol, the White House, a heavy urban center. There are restrictions on where you can fly, what kind of approaches you can make. There are commercial flights, military flights. It's busy.
This is a geographically constrained airport. It's relatively small that moves a lot of airplanes.